What if the entire foundation of the modern royal succession, every title, every ceremony, every photograph, was built on a lie? What if the biggest secret of the last decade wasn't hidden in some dusty palace archive, but in broad daylight, disguised behind staged smiles, carefully choreographed public appearances, and a narrative polished so perfectly that millions never questioned it? And what if King Charles, after years of silence, has now shattered that narrative with one brutal, irreversible decision? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That's the question that sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and across every major newsroom in the world. A single document, a single signature, a single phrase that forever changed royal history. With one stroke of a pen, King Charles removed Archie from the line of succession. Not paused it, not questioned it, not reviewed it, removed it. Why now? Why this moment? Why this child? The public was told it was routine, a constitutional adjustment, some news outlets whispered, a minor clerical correction. But palace insiders say something very different. They say the king was pushed to the edge. Cornered by revelations he could no longer ignore, pressured by advisors who feared the monarchy might collapse under the weight of a secret that had grown too large, too volatile, too dangerous to keep buried. And at the center of that secret was Meghan Markle. You might think you've heard every rumor, every theory, every accusation. But the truth is, what's happening behind palace walls right now is darker, stranger, and far more explosive than anyone imagined. Because sources say this isn't just about Archie's position in the royal hierarchy. It's about the legitimacy of the boy's birth itself. And that's where the story takes a turn so sharp, so unexpected, that even the most seasoned royal watchers were left speechless. Was Meghan Markle ever pregnant? That's the question the palace never wanted asked. That's the question journalists were warned not to pursue. That's the question royal PR teams scrambled to shut down every time it appeared online. But now, after King Charles made his fatal decision, that question has roared back, louder, bolder, and more unavoidable than ever. Why? Because palace insiders claim the king was given evidence. Not rumors, not blurry screenshots. Evidence. But before we get there, before we unravel the midnight report, the hidden medical files, the whistleblower's encrypted messages, and the recordings Meghan allegedly never wanted anyone to hear, we need to step back to the moment everything began to fall apart. It didn't start with the king's final decision. It didn't even start with Meghan's pregnancy announcement. It started with panic. Real, visible panic. Inside the palace months before Archie's birth was even supposed to happen. According to sources who were present at the time, senior royal staff noticed things that didn't add up. Schedules that shifted without explanation. Medical arrangements that didn't follow royal protocol. Hospital staff who were instructed, unusually, not to prepare. Photographers who were warned not to show certain angles. And perhaps most bizarrely, the palace insisted on secrecy so intense that even long-standing royal advisors were kept out of key meetings. Audience, ask yourself, when has a royal birth ever been treated like this? When Kate Middleton gave birth to her children, the world was updated by the hour. The hospital steps became a global stage. Medical staff were proudly acknowledged. Everything, from the size of the baby blanket to the color of her dress, was public and transparent. But Meghan's pregnancy? It was the most concealed royal event in modern history. No hospital steps, no medical details, no precise timeline, no clear confirmations. You see the difference. You feel the difference. And so did King Charles. At first, he kept his concerns private. It was a delicate time for the family. Harry and Meghan were already struggling with the press. Tensions were rising behind closed doors. But then, something happened. Something the palace still refuses to comment on. Something that forced the king to quietly order an internal review. One that remained completely hidden from the public. This wasn't a gossip investigation. It wasn't about public relations. It was constitutional. It was about the inheritance of the crown. The king had one duty above all: protect the integrity of the monarchy. And from what we now know, that integrity was already hanging by a thread. That internal review uncovered something. Something that made the king realize the problem wasn't temporary, wasn't manageable, and wasn't something he could simply ignore. The whispers inside royal corridors shifted from "there may be an issue" to we could have a constitutional crisis. And if that crisis wasn't handled with absolute precision, the monarchy itself could be delegitimized. But what exactly did the king learn during this review? Why did it push him to make the harshest decision a monarch can make, erasing his grandson from the lineage? The truth was more complicated, more technical, and more personal than anyone could imagine. Because once the review exposed its findings, another report arrived. A midnight delivery. A sealed envelope. A royal courier sent directly to King Charles's private residence. And inside that envelope was the document that changed everything. The document that forced him to do the unthinkable. But what was in that sealed envelope? And why did it make the king act without hesitation? The answer is coming. And when you hear it, you'll understand why Meghan Markle was reportedly furious, why Harry went silent, and why King Charles told his advisors, "This cannot wait another day." The story is only beginning. But before we open that sealed envelope, before we expose the sentence that ignited the king's wrath and pushed Meghan Markle into what palace aides described as meltdown mode, we need to revisit a moment most people overlooked. The moment the royal family realized they had lost control of the narrative. It happened during Meghan's first pregnancy announcement tour. Cameras flashed. Reporters cheered. Everything looked perfect. But behind the scenes, members of the royal household noticed something strange. Nothing about this pregnancy followed royal protocol. Not one thing. For example, Meghan's schedule was never adjusted. She traveled more in her second trimester than most royals travel in a year. She bent, crouched, squatted, twisted, movements heavily restricted for pregnant women carrying a child of her claimed stage. Royal medical advisors raised mild concerns, but were reportedly shut down with the same line. Meghan wants to be seen, and she wants to show strength. But strength wasn't the issue. Consistency was. Her bump changed shape. One day it was high, the next day low. One day pointed, the next day flat. In some appearances, she clutched it dramatically. In others, she seemed to forget it entirely. Several photographers privately noted that her bump collapsed inward when she stood up from a chair. The clips are still circulating online, but mainstream outlets never touched them. Ask yourself why? Royal pregnancies are usually the most documented moments in the Windsor family. Every royal baby is treated as a state event. But Meghan's entire pregnancy was treated as a private venture, controlled, curated, and cordoned off from scrutiny. Kate's pregnancies followed tradition. Meghan's broke every tradition simultaneously. Still, the palace stayed quiet. They refused to say anything publicly, even as concerns mounted, because admitting the truth, or even questioning it, would have set off a storm the family was not ready to face. Back then, Queen Elizabeth was still alive. She believed in stability above all things. She reportedly said once, "A storm delayed is a storm survived." So the palace delayed. They covered. They hoped whatever was happening would sort itself out. But it didn't. Because when Archie was born, the palace made the most suspicious announcement in modern royal history. They refused to reveal the hospital. Not the doctors. Not the medical staff. Not the delivery timeline. They couldn't even agree whether he was born at dawn or at midday. What kind of royal birth has no witnesses? This was not tradition. This was deviation. Extreme deviation. And King Charles, even then, took notes. He knew that if questions were ever raised about the legitimacy of the child's birth, the monarchy could be plunged into a constitutional crisis. But he also knew Meghan was already claiming mistreatment by the press. The king wanted to avoid adding fuel to the fire. So he waited. But the more he waited, the worse it became. Now fast forward to the moment Meghan and Harry moved to Canada, then California, then Montecito. No royal child had ever been kept at such a distance, both physically and symbolically, from the heart of the monarchy. Still, the king held his tongue. He loved Harry, and he believed, perhaps naively, that time would settle everything. But time did not settle anything. It exposed everything. Because when Meghan and Harry announced Lilibet's birth, without ever showing medical documentation, without ever identifying staff, without even providing a hospital photo, the palace began to panic for real. Not publicly, but internally. Very internally. Charles ordered a quiet update of royal lineage records. He requested verification documents. But the documents never came. Not late. Not incomplete. They never came at all. Every request from the king's office was met with privacy, boundaries, or safety concerns. Strange, considering every royal baby for 100 years had been documented thoroughly. Why were these children the exception? But the breaking point came when a senior palace official, not a tabloid journalist, not a conspiracy theorist, but a respected internal advisor, filed a confidential note to King Charles and the Privy Council. The note read, "There may be discrepancies regarding the legitimacy of the births." This was the moment the king realized he could no longer avoid the truth. From that day forward, the palace began tracking timelines, communication patterns, medical inconsistencies, witness accounts. The more they investigated, the more anomalies they discovered. And soon, the internal whisper turned into a warning. This may affect succession. That's when the midnight envelope arrived. A sealed packet, no return address, delivered directly to King Charles's private chambers at Clarence House. According to sources, inside that envelope was a summary from an independent investigator, someone the monarchy did not hire. Someone who traced hospital records, staff testimonies, photos, inconsistencies, and legal documents. Someone who concluded that the king needed to act immediately. The tone of the report was blunt, unfiltered, terrifying. But the detail that shook King Charles the hardest wasn't in the first paragraph, or the second, or the third. It was in the final line of the report, a line his advisors say he read aloud twice, then said nothing for nearly a full minute. That line read, "Archie cannot be verified as born of the mother he is claimed to be." That was the moment the king realized everything had changed. This was no longer about parenting styles, or media drama, or royal family disagreements. This was about legitimacy, bloodline, constitutional law. If the monarch knowingly allowed the wrong person into the line of succession, the entire monarchy could be deemed compromised, invalid, a fraud. Charles had no choice. He activated protocol, and protocol dictated one thing: remove the child until legitimacy can be proven. The king didn't do it with pleasure. He didn't do it with anger. He did it because the monarchy cannot inherit uncertainty. And right now, Archie's origins were one giant question mark. But when Meghan found out, the palace says her reaction shook the walls. She allegedly screamed that Charles was destroying her family. She accused him of racism, cruelty, revenge. She threatened legal action. She threatened interviews. She threatened to expose the monarchy. But Charles didn't flinch. He had made his decision. And yet, what Meghan didn't know was that the king wasn't acting on that report alone. There was a second report. A deeper, darker report. One she had no idea existed. One that didn't just question the pregnancy. It questioned everything surrounding it. So let's go deeper, into the second report. The one the palace didn't want anyone to know existed. The one that wasn't delivered to King Charles's residence, but directly into his hand during a private, unrecorded meeting inside Buckingham Palace. A report that senior royal insiders describe as the most disturbing internal document ever produced about a member of the royal family. This report wasn't compiled by palace staff. It wasn't handled by advisors. It wasn't even overseen by the Privy Council. It was created by a group of specialists known only inside royal circles as Protocol Unit 9, a team activated only in cases where a constitutional risk threatens the stability of the monarchy itself. They deal with information that never reaches the press. They assess marital scandals, attempted blackmail, secret dealings, hidden relationships, and, yes, questions of lineage. This wasn't a rumor investigation. This was a legitimacy investigation. The deepest one the monarchy had ordered since the abdication crisis of 1936. And what they uncovered forced the king to confront the unthinkable. The possibility that both of Harry's children may not have been born under the conditions their parents claimed. Protocol Unit 9 took apart every detail: travel schedules, hospital access logs, medical team rosters, security camera timestamps, media footage, wardrobe inconsistencies, and Meghan's own public statements. They cross-referenced every hour of her pregnancy timeline. The results were devastating. Several points in the report contradicted Meghan and Harry's public narrative entirely. For example, Unit 9 noted that during the period Meghan claimed to be in her third trimester, she boarded multiple flights, not private jets, but commercial and semi-commercial flights, without any medical restrictions. Anyone familiar with royal protocols knows this is unheard of. Every pregnant royal receives travel clearance. Meghan never once requested it. Then came the medical details. According to flight records, Meghan undertook 9 hours of back-to-back travel across multiple countries just days before her supposed due date. A medical impossibility for someone carrying a full-term child unless extraordinary measures were taken. Why was no palace doctor present? Why did she refuse the royal obstetrician? Why did she insist on privacy arrangements that no royal mother before her ever demanded? But the most important part of Unit 9's report wasn't the travel inconsistencies or even the wardrobe anomalies. It was the part they labeled medical verification gaps. This section revealed that the Royal Medical Team, one of the most highly trusted groups in the entire UK, was never given access to Meghan at any point during her alleged pregnancy. Not for checkups, not for consultations, not for emergency calls, not for documentation. Not once. This had never happened before. Even Princess Diana, during the height of her emotional turmoil, worked with the royal obstetric staff at all times. Kate Middleton did too. Every royal mother did. It wasn't optional, it was mandatory for the safety of the line of succession. Meghan bypassed all of it. The report also included testimony from 3 former royal aides. One stated, she refused every scheduled visit. Every single one. Another testified, I was instructed never to question it. If we asked about medical appointments, we were told we were invading her privacy. A third aide noted something chilling. It felt like she was hiding something. Something big. Unit 9 didn't stop there. They contacted hospitals discreetly, every major medical facility within the radius of Meghan's alleged delivery dates. Not one hospital confirmed her presence under any alias connected with security patterns. Not one staff member had seen her. Not one nurse had documentation. No check-in, no check-out, nothing. And as the report put it, there is no verifiable medical chain confirming a royal birth. Let that sink in. There is no royal birth without a royal birth record. Everything after that point, titles, announcements, photo ops, depended entirely on trust. A trust the palace felt slipping through its fingers as the evidence mounted. But that wasn't the end. Unit 9 dug deeper. And this is where the story takes a darker, more complicated turn. One that would explain Meghan's fury, Harry's silence, and Charles's urgency to act. Because the report brought up something unexpected. Something the palace had noticed but never questioned until this point. A pattern. A repeating behavior. A timeline inconsistency involving both pregnancies, Archie and Lilibet. Unit 9's investigators noticed that during both supposed pregnancies, Meghan disappeared for strategic periods of time. She went dark. No public sightings. No private appointments. No nanny testimonies. Nothing. These gaps lasted days at a time. And every time she resurfaced, her bump size, shape, and positioning changed. Even more disturbing, the report found that during the exact hours Meghan claimed to be in labor with Archie, Harry was documented as being at a separate location. For miles away, from where the alleged birth was said to have occurred, the timestamps didn't match the story. Not even close. Unit 9 concluded that the official narrative could not be medically or logistically verified. And so, they made a recommendation, one King Charles could not ignore. In the final paragraph, their conclusion was stark. For the protection of the crown, lineage must be validated. Without validation, the child cannot remain within the line of succession. This wasn't an accusation. This wasn't speculation. This was a constitutional directive. And it was placed in the king's hands with a warning. Immediate action is advised. That is why the king moved quickly. That is why there was no delay, no negotiation, no debate. He knew that if the public learned that the monarchy knowingly allowed an unverified heir to remain in the official succession registry, the entire royal institution could collapse. And that brings us to the moment of impact. The moment everything in this story detonates. Because when Meghan discovered that King Charles had officially removed Archie from the succession line, she didn't just get angry. According to palace insiders, she went nuclear. They say she confronted Charles directly. They say she accused him of racism, punishment, personal bias, revenge, emotional cruelty. She told him he was destroying her marriage. She told him he should be ashamed. She threatened interviews. She threatened lawsuits. She threatened exposing what the monarchy did to her. But Charles wasn't moved. Because Charles hadn't shown her the second report. He hadn't revealed the true reason behind his decision. But Meghan was about to find out. Because someone inside the palace, was about to leak something far worse. Something that didn't just question her pregnancy. It would set the stage for the most explosive royal confrontation in modern history. So now we arrive at the breaking point. The moment where all the secrets, all the reports, all the quiet investigations collided with explosive force. And if you thought King Charles's decision alone was enough to ignite a crisis, what happened next made that look like the calm before the storm. Because Meghan was blindsided. Completely. She thought she was dealing with one problem. The king removing Archie from the line of succession. Painful, humiliating, unfair in her eyes, but manageable. She believed she could fight that. She believed she could spin it. She believed she could go to the media and frame herself, once again, as the wounded outsider, the victimized duchess unfairly targeted by an ancient, heartless system. But she didn't know about the leak. Not yet. And she had no idea that the leak didn't come from the king, or from William, or from Camilla, or from anyone in the senior royal circle. It came from someone much closer. A palace aide described it as a betrayal from inside the inner ring. A leak so unexpected that even King Charles was caught off guard. And when Meghan heard what was leaked, when she understood the implications, her fury transformed into something deeper, more desperate, more primal. Because this time, the narrative was no longer hers to control. Here's what happened. 2 days after Archie was quietly removed from the succession line, a senior journalist from a major UK newspaper received a package, unmarked, untraceable. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no signature, just one item. The entire internal summary of Protocol Unit 9's findings. Not the raw files, not the interviews, not the classified recordings, but the summary. The same summary the king had read. The same summary that recommended Archie's removal. The same summary that connected the dots in a way no one outside the monarchy was ever supposed to see. To be clear, this summary didn't state outright that Meghan had faked a pregnancy. It didn't claim surrogacy. It didn't accuse her of wrongdoing. It didn't need to. It simply said, there is insufficient evidence to validate the royal birth as presented to the crown. That one line, cold, clinical, devastating, was enough to blow a hole the size of Buckingham Palace through Meghan's entire public narrative. Within hours, the journalist tried to confirm the story with the palace. But for reasons still unclear, the palace's communications team did not respond immediately. They hesitated. They discussed. They panicked. Meanwhile, word spread among the newsroom. Someone leaked it further. By the next morning, 2 additional outlets had heard whispers of the story. Nothing published yet. Only hints, only rumors, only off-record conversations. But it was enough to terrify Meghan. Because she knew what she had always known. The one thing she could never survive was the collapse of the narrative she had built her image on. And if the world ever believed she wasn't pregnant? If the world ever believed the royal children weren't biologically hers? If the world ever believed the monarchy had acted to protect its legitimacy at her expense? Her public persona would implode. Her deals would crumble. Her brand would shatter. And her marriage, already strained according to palace insiders, would face its biggest test yet. That's why she rushed to confront King Charles. That's why she demanded explanations, demanded answers, demanded apologies. But Charles stood firm. He told her the decision was constitutional, not emotional, not personal, not revenge. It was about the monarchy's survival. A monarch's first duty is not to family, it is to the crown. This infuriated Meghan even more. Because from her perspective, Charles wasn't protecting the crown. He was destroying her legacy. She reportedly accused him of humiliating her publicly. She claimed he was trying to erase her children. She said he was choosing the institution over blood. She told him that she and Harry would go nuclear if needed. She felt cornered. She felt betrayed. She felt like the king had declared war on her family. And yet, Charles remained calm, quiet, almost cold. Because he knew something Meghan didn't. He knew the investigation wasn't over. He knew more evidence was coming. He knew Archie wasn't the only question that needed answering. Because the second report, the one Meghan still hadn't seen, didn't just analyze Archie's birth. It analyzed Lilibet's birth as well. And what it concluded would set off a chain reaction so shocking that even senior royals struggled to process it. Something that would force Harry to confront a truth he had avoided for years. Something that would push Meghan to her breaking point. Something that would make King Charles say, in private, "This will change the monarchy forever." And that's where the Royal story begins. Because removing Archie from the line of succession was just the first step. The next revelation, the one buried deep inside that second report. What kind of document is powerful enough to shake the very bones of the monarchy? What kind of file, thin, silent, stamped with the royal crest in cold black ink, could cause King Charles to push aside centuries of tradition and erase his own grandson from the royal bloodline? That question has haunted every corner of Buckingham Palace since the morning Charles signed what staff privately call the fatal revision. A document so sensitive, so explosive, that only 3 people were authorized to see it before it reached his desk. But before we talk about that signature, we need to rewind to the moment the document was first requested, because that moment says everything. It was early morning. The palace was unusually quiet. Rain tapped against the centuries-old windows of Clarence House. And King Charles, who is usually surrounded by advisors, assistants, and security at that hour, was alone. He had asked everyone to give him space. No interruptions, no chatter, no noise. He needed to think. Because the night before, he had read the midnight envelope. He had read the Protocol Unit 9 report. He had seen the line that shattered the illusion. Archie cannot be verified as born of the mother he is claimed to be. And for the first time since becoming king, Charles felt the weight of the crown. Not the symbolic weight, not the ceremonial weight, but the crushing, historical weight that demanded one thing and one thing only: protect the lineage. There are only a few moments in royal history where a monarch is forced into a corner this sharp. His mother, Queen Elizabeth II, faced the abdication shadow of her own father. King George V faced a government coup. But Charles faced a biological crisis, a legitimacy crisis, a crisis that could unravel the monarchy down to its roots. So what did he do? He summoned the Keeper of the Rolls. This official, unknown to most of the public, is responsible for maintaining the legal continuity of the crown. Births, deaths, titles, succession, constitutional transitions. Everything that ensures the monarchy's line remains unbroken. When Charles called him, the keeper knew immediately something was very, very wrong. Because kings do not call him before dawn unless something catastrophic is coming. When the keeper arrived, rain still dripping from his coat, he found Charles sitting at his desk, still holding the report in his hands. The king didn't offer tea. He didn't stand. He didn't walk the room. He simply handed the report across the table and said, in a voice described as tired but decisive, "We can't ignore this any longer." The keeper skimmed the report. He looked up. He asked one question: "Your Majesty, do you want verification or removal?" And Charles answered instantly, without hesitation: "Removal." That's when the wheels of history began to turn. Because once a monarch orders removal from the line of succession, a chain of events is triggered, events hidden from the public, events carefully protected by royal secrecy, events that only a handful of people on Earth even know exist. The first step? Drafting the fatal revision. The document that shook the crown. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't thick. It didn't contain paragraphs of accusations or political rhetoric. It was surprisingly short, simple, almost sterile. A few sentences, a legal justification, a reference to constitutional protocol, and one final line that carried the force of a guillotine. HRH Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor is hereby removed from the line of succession pending verification of lawful royal birth. It was the kind of sentence that ends dynasties. The kind of sentence that historians reference for centuries. The kind of sentence that Meghan would later describe as a personal execution. But in that moment, before the outrage, before the panic, before the backlash, there was only silence. A cold, heavy, suffocating silence. And Charles sat in it. He knew the world would explode when the truth came out. He knew Meghan and Harry would retaliate. He knew the press would devour every angle and twist it into madness. But he also knew the crown could not wait. Not after everything he had learned. Not after the holes in the timeline. Not after the missing records. Not after the medical verification gaps. Not after the untraceable birth documentation. Not after the internal warnings. And especially not after the second report. The one that Meghan still didn't know existed. The one that hinted at a larger deception unfolding over years. So the document was drafted. But drafting it wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was what happened next. Because after the fatal revision was written, it needed to be witnessed. Co-signed. Logged. Sealed. And that required someone who had been avoiding the palace for months. Prince Harry. That's right. Harry had to sign it too. Not because he agreed with it. Not because he wanted it. But because the removal of a royal child requires parental acknowledgement, at least from one parent born into the royal bloodline. And Harry? Harry is the blood. So the palace sent for him. Not by text. Not by email. Not by formal invitation. They sent a security officer, one of Charles's most trusted men, to retrieve him in person. Harry refused at first. He said he didn't understand. He said he needed time. He said he needed to talk to Meghan. But protocol doesn't wait. Not for feelings. Not for explanations. Not for phone calls. If the king commands presence, you show up. And so, reluctantly, hesitantly, Harry returned to the palace for the first time in months. Witnesses say he looked exhausted. Older. Worn down by the California lifestyle he once thought would save him. When he walked into the room where the fatal revision waited, he paused. He saw the document. He saw his son's name. He saw the line striking Archie from the royal lineage. Harry reportedly whispered, "My God, what have you done?" But Charles didn't answer. He simply pointed to the signature line. And that's when the room changed. Harry's hands shook. His breath caught. He stared at the paper for nearly 2 full minutes. And then, according to one aide who witnessed it, Harry asked the question the king had been waiting for him to ask. "Do you know something I don't?" Charles didn't respond immediately. He simply slid the second report across the table. The one Meghan didn't know about. The one Harry didn't know about. The one that made the first report look mild. Harry read the first page, then the second, then the third, and by the fourth page, he put his hand over his mouth. A silent, devastating gesture. Because in that report, Harry saw details that rattled him to his core. Details that contradicted dates he thought were true. Details that disproved memories he believed were real. Details that suggested he may have been kept in the dark. And that was when Harry signed. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He didn't even cry. He just signed. A single signature that echoed louder than thunder. And with that signature, the document became official. Archie was erased from the succession. Forever, unless verification could overturn it. But the king knew something Harry didn't know. Verification was not coming. Not soon. Maybe not ever. Because the next part of the second report, the part Harry hadn't read yet, would blow the doors completely off the situation. A section labeled, Subject, Lilibet Diana Mountbatten Windsor, Findings. And those findings were far worse than anything in Archie's case. Far worse. Far more incriminating. Far more difficult to explain. And when the palace opened that section, everything they thought they understood about this crisis shifted again. The fatal revision wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. Harry's signature was the moment the palace machinery activated. Cold, mechanical, unstoppable. But the emotional aftermath? That was human. Raw. Messy. And it began the moment Harry placed the pen down and stepped back like he had just signed away a piece of his soul. He didn't look at Charles. He didn't look at the keeper of the rolls. He didn't look at the document again. He just stared forward, as if he were seeing something far away, an old memory, a different life, a world where things still made sense. A world that no longer existed. Because in that room, something broke inside him. And everyone felt it. One royal aide later described the atmosphere as so heavy it was like the walls were holding their breath. But Charles had no time to comfort him. He had no time to soften the blow. The monarchy doesn't pause for heartbreak. Not even the heartbreak of a son. Not even the heartbreak of a father. There were still signatures to be logged, witnesses to be recorded, seals to be applied. The machinery of the crown had to move forward before leaks could move faster. Within minutes, the fatal revision was placed inside a protective folder, thick, reinforced, and lined with the royal cipher. It was carried down a hidden corridor beneath Buckingham Palace, through a secure passage only used for matters of national continuity. Only 3 men walked that corridor. The keeper of the rolls, the king's private secretary, and Commander Elwood, head of palace security. As they walked, the keeper said something that chilled even the seasoned security chief. This is the first time in modern monarchy that a child has been removed without a public preceding event. In other words, no scandal, no announcement, no official inquiry, just removal. Because the scandal wasn't public, it was internal, and far more dangerous. When they reached the vault room, the door was opened by biometric authentication. A steel container slid out from the wall. The fatal revision was placed inside. Locked, stamped, logged. History recorded it, even though the world hadn't seen it yet. But while this was happening underground, something else was happening upstairs. Something that would become the spark of the next explosive moment. Harry was still standing alone in the signing room, silent, motionless, staring at the table where the document lay moments earlier. It was then that Charles returned, not as a king, but as a father. He entered the room quietly, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither man spoke. Charles approached slowly, unsure how much Harry had processed, unsure how much Harry even understood yet. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Charles said, "There is more you need to know." Harry didn't answer. Charles continued, "I didn't want to show you the full report today. You were already dealing with enough. But you asked me a question earlier. You asked if I knew something you didn't." That made Harry finally look up. His eyes were rimmed red. Not from crying. He hadn't cried, but from shock, from realization, from the quiet, suffocating fear that maybe, just maybe, his own life narrative was slipping out of his control. "What else don't I know?" Harry asked. Charles exhaled slowly. "The report includes findings about Lilibet." That sentence shattered the fragile silence. Harry took a step forward. "What about her?" Charles didn't answer immediately. He gestured to the chair. "Sit down, Harry." But Harry didn't sit. He clenched his jaw, fists tightening. "What about her?" Charles closed his eyes briefly. He didn't want this. He didn't want any of it. But kings don't get to choose the truth. They only get to manage its consequences. "Finally," Charles said, "her birth cannot be verified either." Harry's breath caught. It was a sharp, involuntary inhale, the kind that comes from a blow to the chest. His shoulders tensed. His eyes widened. For a brief moment, he looked like he might collapse. But he didn't. He steadied himself, swallowed hard, and said, with a trembling voice, "That's impossible." Charles shook his head. "I wish it were." Harry grabbed the edge of the table, knuckles white. "You're wrong. You have to be wrong. This is insane." Charles stepped closer. "The report isn't based on speculation. It's based on medical logs, travel data, testimonies, documentation." "What documentation?" Harry snapped. "She gave birth in the United States, not here. Why would the palace have those files?" And there it was. Harry didn't realize it, but that question betrayed something. The palace did have files. Files Harry didn't know existed. Files Meghan definitely didn't know existed. Charles could see that realization flash across his son's face. Brief, but unmistakable. Harry suddenly understood. The palace had been tracking everything. Even from thousands of miles away. Even after the split. Even after the Sussexes declared independence. Harry's breathing grew uneven. "You had people watching us?" Charles didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it either. He simply said, "We monitor anything that affects the crown." Harry stepped back. "She's my daughter." Charles nodded. "And she is a child the world believes may inherit proximity to the throne someday. We must confirm her origins." Harry ran both hands through his hair, pacing now, angry, panicked, trapped. "This is insane. You're treating them like they're criminals." "We are treating the situation like a constitutional matter," Charles replied. "This isn't about feelings. It's about the truth." Harry slammed his fist on the table. "The truth? You think you know the truth? You think a report knows more about my children than I do?" Charles didn't flinch. "Harry, do you?" Silence. Cold, cutting silence. Because Harry didn't have an answer. Not one he trusted. Not one he could swear by. Not one that stood up against the timeline inconsistencies now screaming inside his mind. For the first time, Harry felt the ground beneath him shift. Memories he thought were real suddenly felt uncertain. Moments he trusted now seemed blurred. Details he never questioned now seemed suspicious. Charles saw the doubt. He didn't gloat. He didn't push. He simply placed his hand on the table between them and said, "Harry, The truth will come out, with or without you. But I'd rather you stand with the crown when it does." Harry lifted his head. "And Meghan?" Charles paused. Then he said something that palace insiders say cut through the air like a blade. "Meghan will not like what happens next." And just like that, the doorway swung open, not physically, but metaphorically, into the next crisis. Because the fatal revision was only one document. The next, far more dangerous document, was already being prepared by the Crown's legal office. A document that addressed Lilibet. A document that would make the world explode. A document Meghan would not see coming. Harry didn't leave the palace immediately. He couldn't. His legs wouldn't carry him out. His mind was spinning in 1,000 directions at once, colliding with memories, doubts, loyalties, fears, and a growing sense that something enormous had been hidden from him, and he had no idea how deep that deception ran. He stood there, palms flat on the table, breathing slowly but heavily, grounding himself in the only solid thing in the room, the polished wood beneath his hands. Charles didn't move either. A king and his son, frozen in the aftermath of a truth that neither wanted, yet both were drowning in. The silence between them stretched long enough to feel like a lifetime. Finally, Harry said quietly, "You can't do this to them." Charles responded just as quietly, "I didn't do this to them." Harry clenched his jaw. "Then who did?" Charles sighed, a long, exhausted exhale that carried years of royal burdens. "That's what the investigation will answer. But until it does, the crown must protect itself." And there it was, that cold, unyielding phrase. Protect itself. To the monarchy, the crown comes before the individual, before the family, before the emotions of the moment, before everything. Harry knew that. He'd known it since childhood. But knowing it and feeling it crush down on your own children were two very different things. He stepped back from the table, shaking his head, eyes unfocused. "Meghan will never forgive you." A flicker passed across Charles's eyes. Not fear, not regret, but steeled acceptance. "Then she will not forgive me." Harry swallowed hard. "And the public? Do you know what they'll say? Do you know what they'll do when this gets out?" Charles nodded. "Yes, and that is why it must be done properly. Carefully, constitutionally, and not through leaks." But leaks were already happening, and neither man knew how close the next one was. Because while Harry and Charles stood in that room wrestling with the ghost of royal tradition, someone else inside the palace was making a dangerous choice, one driven by fear, loyalty, or perhaps revenge. Someone was copying portions of the second report. Someone was preparing to expose everything. Someone was about to ignite a firestorm. But we're not there yet. Not quite. Right now, we are still in the room where Harry was unraveling. "Where's the part about Lilibet?" he demanded suddenly. Charles blinked. "Harry, I want to see it." "Harry, you are not in a state to." I said, "I want to see it." There was no yelling, no screaming, no theatrics, just raw, quiet determination. A man desperate for answers. A father terrified for his children. A son betrayed by the people he trusted most. Charles hesitated. And for the first time since he became king, he looked unsure, truly unsure. The decision weighed on him. Show Harry the full truth now and risk destabilizing him, or hide it a little longer and risk being seen as deceitful. Neither option was good. Neither option was safe. But kings don't get to choose safety. So Charles nodded to one of his advisors waiting outside the door. The man quietly stepped in, carrying a folder, black, sealed, heavier than the first report. The advisor placed it on the table between father and son. "This is it?" Harry asked. "Yes," Charles said softly. "But, before you open it, you must understand something. The information inside is incomplete. We still have gaps, verifications, confirmations. We need more time." Harry's voice was hard. "I've given you years." Charles closed his eyes briefly. "Then you know we're running out of them." Harry opened the folder. Inside were 4 sections. Timeline discrepancies, unverified locations, medical absence logs, photographic inconsistencies. He stared at the headings, frozen. The first page detailed the timeline. Exact dates, exact hours, exact locations. Harry scanned it, his eyes darting across the lines like a man searching for oxygen. On the morning Meghan claimed to be in labor with Lilibet, she had been documented at a different location entirely, verified by mobile metadata and third-party footage. Harry had been in another location altogether. Harry whispered, This is impossible. Charles didn't answer. Harry flipped the page. Another contradiction. Another timeline error. Another missing medical entry. He flipped again. And again. In the unverified locations section, there were photos from paparazzi agencies. Photos Harry had seen before in tabloids, but never thought twice about. But side by side with official timestamps from hospitals, something didn't match. In fact, nothing matched. Harry's fingers trembled as he turned to the next section, medical absence logs. A long table listed hospitals contacted by the palace. Every hospital said the same thing. No record. No staff report. No medical team. No birthing suite booked. No alias matching security logs. Harry closed his eyes tight. His forehead dropped into his hand. When he opened the next section, photographic inconsistencies, he froze. There, printed in color, were side-by-side comparisons of Meghan's bump appearances. Not tabloid versions. Not internet screenshots. These were high-resolution, uncropped originals from palace archives. Some increased in size dramatically overnight. Some shifted position unnaturally. Some defied basic pregnancy progression. Some appeared under outfits that should have emphasized a late-term bump, but didn't. Harry flipped the page so quickly it tore slightly at the corner. He couldn't look anymore. He couldn't process anymore. He pushed the folder away, stepping back as if the document itself had burned him. No, he whispered. No, this isn't real. Harry, Charles said gently. But Harry shook his head violently. No, she wouldn't lie about this. Not about this. His voice cracked. Charles stepped forward. It may not be a lie, but something is wrong, Harry, and we must determine what. Harry's chest rose and fell rapidly. So you're saying what? That someone faked it? That she faked it? That we staged it? Are you listening to yourself? Charles did not raise his voice. Did not soften it either. He simply said, I am listening to the evidence. Harry pressed his palms to his forehead. You think my daughter isn't my daughter? Charles hesitated, which was enough of an answer. Harry turned away, tears gathering but refusing to fall. I can't do this. You must, Charles said firmly. Because what happens next depends on you. Harry stopped. What do you mean? Charles inhaled deeply, bracing himself. The next document, the one being drafted as we speak, may concern Lilibet. Harry spun around. You're removing her too? I'm preparing for the possibility, Charles replied. Harry staggered back, breathless. You can't do that. You can't take both of them. That depends, Charles said, on what we discover next. Harry stared at him, stunned, horrified, shaking. And that was when the palace aide burst into the room without knocking, face pale as paper. Your Majesty, he gasped. We have a problem. Charles turned sharply. What is it? The aide swallowed hard. The summary of the report has leaked again. Harry's eyes snapped open. Charles tightened his grip on the table. The aide continued, voice shaking. And this time, it wasn't just sent to a journalist. He paused. It was sent to Meghan. For a moment, no one in the room moved. Not Harry. Not Charles. Not the aide frozen in the doorway. It was as if the entire palace inhaled and forgot how to exhale. Meghan had the report. Not a rumor. Not a whisper. Not a headline. The actual summary. The same summary that had shaken the king. The same summary that had made Harry question everything. The same summary that described inconsistencies about Archie's birth, coldly, clinically, and unavoidably. Harry's face drained of color. How? He demanded, voice raw. The aide shook his head. We don't know yet, but the file was emailed from an encrypted throwaway account. It was routed through 3 servers. We're trying to trace it, but... He hesitated. Charles forced the words out. But what? The aide swallowed. The message attached said, she deserves to know the truth, too. Harry staggered backward. Charles's jaw clenched. Someone inside the palace wanted Meghan to know everything. Someone wanted chaos. Someone wanted war. What did she say? Harry croaked. Did she respond? The aide nodded grimly. Yes. She sent one line. Charles braced himself. What did she write? The aide read directly from his phone. She wrote, Tell the king I'm coming. Silence. Cold, sharp, terrifying silence. Because Meghan wasn't just angry. She wasn't just blindsided. She was mobilizing. Charles drew in a slow breath. How long until she arrives? She's already on her way, the aide said. Security says she left the Montecito estate immediately. Private jet. Direct to London. Harry grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. My God. Charles closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if asking the universe for strength. When he opened them again, the king was back. Not the father. The king. He turned to Harry. Listen to me carefully. When she arrives, she will be emotional. She will be frightened. She will be angry. Harry stared at the floor. She has every right to be. That may be true, Charles replied. But we cannot let emotion dictate constitutional procedure. Harry snapped his head up. Constitutional? She's my wife, and the monarchy is my responsibility, Charles said quietly. Both things are true. Harry pressed his palms into his eyes, his voice trembling. You have no idea what she's going to do. Oh yes, Charles said softly. I do. He had seen this storm coming long before Harry did. But even Charles didn't know just how explosive Meghan's confrontation would be. Because Meghan wasn't coming silently. She wasn't coming privately. She wasn't coming diplomatically. She was coming with an agenda. With fury. With evidence. With questions she never expected to ask. With demands she was ready to shout through every hallway in Buckingham Palace if she had to. And most dangerously, she was coming with the belief that the monarchy was attacking her children. Harry collapsed into a chair. I need to talk to her. Charles shook his head firmly. No, not yet. If you speak to her now, she will only escalate. She will think you've chosen sides. Harry's voice cracked. Haven't I? Charles's expression tightened, not with anger, but with a deep, aching weariness. This is not about choosing sides, Harry. This is about discovering the truth. Harry looked away, but Charles wasn't finished. When Meghan walks into this palace, he said, she will confront me. She will accuse me of everything under the sun. Racism, revenge, jealousy, control, abuse. But none of that matters. Harry swallowed hard. Then what does? The question she cannot avoid, Charles whispered, is the same one you could not answer. Harry looked up, and Charles asked the question again, slowly, painfully. Do you know, with absolute certainty, how your children were born? Harry didn't answer. He couldn't. And that silence, Harry's silence, was the confirmation Charles didn't want, but needed. The aide stepped forward, voice trembling. Your Majesty, there's one more thing. Charles braced himself. What is it? The leak wasn't just sent to Meghan. Harry's head lifted sharply. What do you mean? The aide exhaled. It was also sent to a journalist at a major American network. Someone known for running with unverified stories. Someone who has spoken directly with Meghan before. Harry's eyes widened. She's going to go public. Charles nodded grimly. Yes, unless we stop her. Harry's voice rose with panic. And how do we do that? She's already furious. She thinks you're erasing her children. Charles's gaze hardened. Then she needs to hear the truth. All of it. Face to face. Harry shook his head violently. No. She'll twist it. She'll scream. She'll threaten to sue the palace. She'll drag the monarchy to international court if she has to. You don't know. I know, Charles cut in, that she is coming whether we want her to or not. And I know that when she arrives, everything we say, every word, every expression, every pause, will become evidence in the public court she intends to create. How do you know that? Harry demanded. Charles looked at him with a grim, quiet certainty. Because, Harry, the second report did not just analyze the births. Harry blinked. What are you talking about? Charles hesitated. Then he stepped toward his son, lowered his voice, and said something that would change the trajectory of the entire crisis. Protocol Unit 9 also found recordings. Harry froze. Recordings of what? Charles locked eyes with him. Conversations. Harry's throat tightened. Whose conversations? Charles answered with devastating clarity. Meghan's. Harry stumbled backward. No, that's impossible. They were obtained legally, Charles said. We did not authorize them. But they exist, and they paint a very different picture of what happened during both pregnancies. Harry's heart pounded in his ears. What do you mean? Charles took a deep breath. In some of these recordings, she speaks about the pregnancies in ways you need to hear for yourself. Harry's face turned white. No. Yes, Charles said quietly. And when she arrives, she will deny everything. She will deny the timelines. She will deny the inconsistencies. She will deny the reports. But she cannot deny her own words. Harry sank into a chair, shaking. I can't face her with this. You must, Charles said. Because what comes next is bigger than you. Bigger than me. Bigger than her. This is about the future of the monarchy. Harry lowered his face into his hands. This will destroy us. Charles's voice softened, not as a king, but as a father. No, Harry, the truth will save you. But the lies will destroy everything. Harry lifted his head, eyes red and raw. What do we do now? The aide answered, grim and pale. We prepare for her arrival. Outside the palace, storm clouds gathered over London. Thick, heavy, ominous. Inside the palace, a storm far greater was about to break. And when Meghan walked through those gates, fueled by fury, betrayal, and the belief that she had been wronged beyond forgiveness, the report didn't arrive in a leather case. It didn't arrive with royal ribbons or ceremonial guards. It didn't arrive through the front gates of Buckingham Palace, because something this volatile could never travel through anything so public, so traceable, so vulnerable. It arrived quietly, secretly, like a shadow moving through the heart of the monarchy. At 12:03 a.m., a black, unmarked car slipped through the palace's East Service entrance, an entrance normally reserved for emergency personnel and matters too sensitive for the public eye. The car's headlights were dimmed. Its windows were tinted beyond legal limits. Its tires made almost no sound on the pavement. Inside the car sat a man who wasn't supposed to exist on palace records. A man with no official title, no staff designation, and no acknowledgement in any public-facing royal structure. He belonged to the internal intelligence network known unofficially as the Crown Office of Verification and Integrity, a unit whispered about only in the darkest corners of palace history. This was not MI5. This was not MI6. This was not Scotland Yard. This was something older, something quieter, something built to protect only one thing: the legitimacy of the crown. His name, for operational reasons, never left the palace walls. He stepped out of the car carrying a slim, weatherproof case, black, reinforced, fingerprint-locked. That case held the document that would change King Charles's relationship with his son forever. A document that would later be known by palace staff simply as the Midnight Report. No one greeted the courier, not by name, not with a salute. This exchange happened without words. A palace security officer with Level 7 clearance simply scanned the case, confirmed its authenticity, and escorted the courier through a private corridor. There was no time for ceremony. Inside the palace, King Charles had been waiting. He hadn't slept. He hadn't lied down. He hadn't even changed out of his evening clothes. He stood beside his desk, hands clasped tightly behind his back, eyes fixed on the far wall where his mother's portrait hung. Queen Elizabeth II had faced constitutional crises, scandals, betrayals, divorces, and national tragedies. But not this. Never this. The courier entered the room silently, placed the case on the desk, and stepped back. Charles dismissed everyone else, advisors, secretaries, even security. Only he and the courier remained. Is this everything? Charles asked. Yes, Your Majesty. Comprehensive, beyond what was requested. Charles nodded. You may go. And with that, the man vanished as quietly as he arrived. Charles stood alone with the case. He hesitated, not because he feared the truth, but because he feared what that truth would force him to do. Being king meant facing things no father ever wished to confront. Still, he placed his thumb on the lock. Click. The case opened. A stack of documents lay inside. Neatly organized, stamped, cross-referenced, and sealed. The Midnight Report wasn't just text. It was photographs, timelines, medical analyses, witness statements, location verifications, metadata logs, even airline records. But the first page wasn't any of those things. It was a cover sheet with a warning. This document contains information critical to the constitutional integrity of the United Kingdom. Read in full before making any assessment. Charles exhaled slowly. Then he began reading. The beginning was factual, clinical, almost cold. It started with the timeline comparison between official palace announcements and actual recorded events. Then it analyzed logistical inconsistencies, security transports that didn't match claimed medical visits, hospital entry points that didn't align with paparazzi footage, missing documentation. Charles had expected inconsistencies. He had expected questions. He had expected anomalies. But he hadn't expected patterns. Patterns that repeated across both pregnancies. Patterns that suggested coordination. Patterns that could not, under any circumstances, be dismissed as coincidence. Still, he kept reading. He read through the section on medical verification failures, which detailed every attempt the Crown Office made to confirm medical participation, hospital involvement, and delivery staff. Not one hospital in the UK or the US had verified involvement. Not one doctor confirmed participation. Not one midwife acknowledged presence. Some refused to comment. Some referred to confidentiality. Some outright denied it. Charles rubbed his temples, trying to steady his breath. Then he turned the page. This section was labeled Witness Accounts, Restricted Access. These witnesses weren't random staffers. They weren't commentators or journalists. They weren't from the public sphere. They were palace insiders. People with direct access. People present during key moments. People whose testimonies were considered credible beyond dispute. One account mentioned Meghan refusing royal medical staff repeatedly, even during supposed late-term weeks. Another detail